The year is 1935. The Great Depression has pushed America to its limits. Families are starving. Cities are crumbling. The American dream feels like a distant memory. But amidst the chaos, something else is rising, a shadowy underworld of criminals, outlaws, and lawmen locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Crime waves sweep across the country like wildfire. Names like John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Bonnie and Clyde are whispered in fear and admiration. But there is one name that stands above them all, a name that would strike terror into the hearts of Americans for decades to come: Ma Barker. A criminal mastermind? The ruthless matriarch of a deadly gang? Or just another victim in the twisted web of lies spun by the most powerful man in American law enforcement, J. Edgar Hoover? Tonight, we unravel the truth. We separate the legend from reality. And we uncover a story that has been buried beneath the weight of propaganda and myth for nearly a century. Was Ma Barker truly the most dangerous woman in America? Or was she just a mother who loved her sons, caught in the crossfire of history's greatest deception? The legend begins. In the grand theater of American crime, few figures loom as large as J. Edgar Hoover. A man obsessed with power, control, and above all image. Hoover was not just the head of the FBI, he was the architect of its legend. And legends need villains. On this particular day, Hoover stands at a podium, his sharp eyes scanning the room full of reporters, his words as precise as the bullets fired by his agents. J. Edgar Hoover, she was the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the last decade. She raised a spawn of criminals and led them like a general commanding an army. The audience gasps. Not just at the words, but at the conviction with which they are spoken. A woman? A criminal mastermind? A mother orchestrating robberies, kidnappings, and murders from the shadows. It was a perfect story. It had everything: a matriarch with an iron grip, a gang of ruthless outlaws, and an FBI determined to bring them down. The press, hungry for sensational headlines, took the bait. And thus, the myth of Ma Barker was born. But was she truly the mastermind Hoover claimed? Or was she simply a mother who followed her sons from town to town, unaware that she was about to become a scapegoat in one of the FBI's greatest deceptions? To understand the truth, we need to go way back to where it all began. The early years. Before Ma Barker became the most feared woman in America, before her name was whispered in dark alleys and splashed across headlines, she was just a girl from the heartland. Her name was Ori Donnie Clark, born in 1874 in rural Missouri, a world far removed from the crime-ridden streets she would one day be accused of ruling. Life was simple. Life was hard. Missouri was a land of dirt roads, wooden farmhouses, and long, grueling days of work. The people here were tough, uneducated, and driven by survival. Ori, like many young women of the time, married young. At just 18 years old, she became Kate Barker when she married George Barker, a quiet, hard-working man with little ambition beyond putting food on the table. Kate and George settled into a life of modest means, raising 4 sons: Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, Doc, and Fred. The Barkers were not rich. They were not influential. They were just another struggling family in America's unforgiving landscape. But something was different about the Barker boys. Trouble seemed to follow them like a storm cloud. From an early age, the Barker boys had a taste for danger. They didn't want to work the fields like their father. They wanted excitement, fast money, and freedom from the small town life that felt like a cage. It started small, stealing candy from the general store, sneaking into fairs without paying. But soon, the crimes escalated. Stolen bicycles became stolen cars. Petty theft became full-blown robberies. One by one, the boys fell into the grip of crime. And through it all, their mother, Kate Barker, stood by them. Did she encourage their actions? Or was she simply a mother who refused to abandon her children, no matter what they did? There was no doubt that Kate loved her boys fiercely. She was protective, some would say overly so. She bailed them out of trouble when she could. She defended them against the law, against neighbors, against anyone who dared speak ill of them. To some, she was just another mother in denial about her son's wrongdoings. To others, she was something more. The foundation of something much darker. By the time her eldest son, Herman, was arrested for armed robbery, Kate had earned a reputation. She was tough. She was loud. And she would do anything for her boys. But was she running the show? Or was she just a mother desperate to keep her family together in a world that was quickly turning against them? As the years passed, the Barker boys grew bolder. They joined gangs, ran with criminals, and made their way into the underworld. The police knew their names. The newspapers began to take notice. But still, Kate Barker remained in the background, a figure no one paid much attention to. That was about to change. Because soon, the Barker name would be known across the country. And Ma Barker, whether guilty or not, would be at the center of it all. A school of crime. By the late 1920s, the Barker boys weren't just small-time troublemakers anymore. They were becoming something more dangerous. Something bigger. Enter Alvin Karpis. A man as cold as he was intelligent. He didn't act on impulse like Fred or Doc. He was careful. He was calculated. And when he met Fred Barker, it was like a match meeting gasoline. Together, they formed what would become the infamous Barker-Karpis Gang. This was no ragtag bunch of outlaws. This was an organized, efficient, and ruthless criminal enterprise. Bank robberies, kidnappings, heists, these weren't just random acts of violence. They were orchestrated, precise, profitable. Their first jobs were small robberies in the dead of night, holding up small town stores and unsuspecting businesses. But soon, they moved on to bigger targets. Banks, payroll trucks, and then, the ultimate prize, kidnapping. A crime that would put them on the FBI's radar in a way no bank robbery ever could. And yet through all of this no one had ever heard of Ma Barker. Not the police. Not the newspapers. Not even other criminals. She wasn't in the hideouts. She wasn't planning jobs. She wasn't giving orders. But that didn't matter. Because when the FBI needed a villain, they didn't need the truth. They needed a story. And Ma Barker was about to become the biggest story of all. The FBI's biggest lie. J. Edgar Hoover had a problem. A big one. The FBI had just taken down John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and Pretty Boy Floyd. The newspapers had been filled with victories, headline after headline proclaiming the Bureau's success in bringing justice to America's most notorious criminals. But there was one problem: the headlines were slowing down. The American public had developed a taste for sensationalized crime stories. They weren't just reading about criminals anymore, they were enthralled by them. Outlaws were turning into celebrities, their names whispered in diners, on street corners, in smoky bars across the country. And the FBI? They needed another big win. Another name to put on their list of trophies. Then came Fred Barker. And with him, Ma Barker. And that's when Hoover saw his opportunity. January 16, 1935. Lake Weir, Florida. A quiet morning. A lake house surrounded by thick trees. Inside, Fred Barker and his mother, Kate, oblivious to the fact that the FBI had finally caught up with them. Before dawn, the Bureau moved in. Dozens of agents, armed to the teeth, positioned themselves around the house. They shouted for Fred to surrender. The response? Gunfire. The shootout lasted hours. Bullets tore through the wooden walls. Smoke filled the air. Neighbors, hiding in their homes, later described the sound of the gunfire as relentless, like thunder crashing over and over again. And then silence. When the dust settled, The FBI made their move. Inside the house, Fred Barker lay lifeless, riddled with bullets. But next to him was the real prize, Ma Barker, also dead. And next to her body, a machine gun. It was the perfect scene. The perfect conclusion to the story Hoover wanted to tell. The mastermind of the Barker-Karpis Gang, the criminal queenpin herself, had gone down in a blaze of glory. A fierce gunfight to the bitter end. But there was one problem. One small, inconvenient detail. Ma Barker was right-handed. And yet, the machine gun was found in her left hand. The truth? She had never fired a shot. The FBI had killed an unarmed, 61-year-old woman and needed a cover story. And so, Hoover did what he did best: he rewrote history. He crafted a legend so compelling that no one dared question it. He turned Ma Barker into a criminal mastermind. Not because she was one, but because he needed her to be. Her death was more useful to the FBI than her life had ever been. And that is how a simple, devoted mother became the most feared woman in America. The truth had been buried. And in its place, a myth was born. The aftermath. The gunfire had stopped. The smoke had settled. Fred Barker was dead. And next to him lay Ma Barker lifeless, a bullet through her chest, a machine gun conveniently placed beside her. The perfect crime scene. The perfect ending to a manufactured legend. But the real game was just beginning. J. Edgar Hoover wasted no time. He stepped in front of the press, lifted a photograph of Ma Barker, and declared her the most dangerous woman in America. The mastermind of the Barker-Karpis Gang. A ruthless crime lord. A criminal genius who had orchestrated robberies, kidnappings, and murders with precision. The reporters scribbled furiously. The public gasped. The legend was set in stone. But here's the problem: there was no evidence. Not a single police report. Not a single arrest. No recorded criminal activity. Ma Barker had never been on any wanted list. She had never been under investigation. In fact, before her death, the FBI had never even mentioned her name. So how did an aging mother with no criminal record become America's most feared female outlaw? The answer lies in the pages of history buried in FBI files marked top secret. For decades, these files remained locked away, hidden from public scrutiny. But when historians finally gained access, the truth was shocking. Kate Ma Barker was nothing more than a mother who followed her sons from town to town, seeking nothing but to be close to her family. She wasn't a criminal mastermind. She wasn't the leader of a gang. She wasn't even involved in planning their crimes. What she was a liability. A loose end that needed to be tied up. Because the FBI didn't just kill Ma Barker. They created her. They turned her into something she never was. A villain. A legend. A ghost story to justify their actions. J. Edgar Hoover was a man obsessed with control. With shaping the narrative. With making sure the FBI always came out on top. And in Ma Barker, he found the perfect scapegoat. With one press conference, he erased the truth and replaced it with fiction. And the world believed him. Because the world always believes the man in power. The newspapers ran the story without question. Hollywood adapted the legend. Books cemented it. And the real Kate Barker? She was forgotten. A tragic figure lost in the shadows of a story that was never hers to begin with. Even today, the name Ma Barker is synonymous with crime. With power. With fear. But those who take the time to look beyond the headlines will find something else: a woman who was nothing more than a mother who loved her sons, caught in the middle of a war she never started. A woman who didn't deserve to die. A woman whose greatest crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Conclusion. History is written by those in power. And no one understood that better than J. Edgar Hoover. He needed a villain. Someone to justify the brutal force of his FBI. someone to hold up as an example of why America needed his brand of justice. And he found that villain in Ma Barker. A name that struck fear. A legend that lasted generations. But as we peel back the layers of myth, one question lingers: was she truly a criminal mastermind? Or just another victim in one of the FBI's greatest deceptions? Think about it. A woman who had never been arrested. A mother who was never mentioned in any criminal file before her death. A figure so insignificant that even notorious gangsters like Alvin Karpis laughed at the idea of her being a criminal mastermind. Yet, her name still echoes through history as one of the most dangerous women in America. And why? Because the narrative was too perfect. Too convenient. A mother leading a gang of ruthless criminals. It was the kind of story that sold newspapers, that kept the public entertained, that solidified the FBI's image as the ultimate force for justice. Even now, decades later, Ma Barker's story is told in books, movies, and TV shows. But few bother to ask the real questions. Few take the time to see the truth beneath the headlines. Few consider that perhaps she was nothing more than an aging woman who wanted nothing more than to stay close to her sons, no matter what path they chose. But history has a way of burying the innocent, of turning victims into villains. And as we close this chapter on Ma Barker, we leave you with one final thought. Who else in history has been rewritten? How many other names have been twisted to serve the needs of those in power? And if Ma Barker, a simple, devoted mother, could be turned into a legend of crime, what other truths have been lost to time? Closing montage, archival photos fade to black. A quote appears on the screen. Ma Barker couldn't plan breakfast, let alone a crime. Alvin Karpis. What do you think? Was Ma Barker really the most dangerous woman in America? Let us know in the comments below.